Of every 100 gecko eggs laid in the wild, fewer than 2 will survive long enough to reproduce. Not 2% who struggle, not 2% who are injured, 2. And the ones who die, they don't go peacefully. They are eaten alive, dehydrated to husks, crushed by indifferent weather, or simply abandoned the moment the shell cracks open. This is not a story of resilience. This is not a story of survival against the odds. This is a story of a creature that the world never stopped trying to erase, and that keeps existing anyway, not because it is strong, but because it has no other choice. The gecko, clinging to walls in the dark, moving across ceilings in silence, staring out from behind glass terrariums in pet stores where people coo and press their fingers to the glass. They do not know what it cost this animal just to be alive in that moment. They do not know what it survived, or what is still hunting it, or how many of its kind never made it this far. They see a small, harmless, wide-eyed creature. What they are actually looking at is one of nature's most exhausted survivors, carrying the weight of a life so hostile, so unrelenting, so stripped of mercy, that the odds alone should have ended it before it began. There is no gentle beginning for a gecko. Most gecko species lay their eggs in hidden crevices, tucked beneath bark, buried in sand, wedged into cracked stone, and then leave. There is no warmth of a mother watching. There is no protection. The egg sits alone in the dark, its paper-thin shell the only barrier between the embryo inside and a world already indifferent to its existence. Temperature fluctuations alone can kill the embryo before it ever draws a breath. Too hot, the proteins denature, the development halts. Too cold, metabolism stalls, and the embryo simply stops. The egg has no way to regulate itself. It can only endure, or not. When a hatchling finally breaks free of its shell using a small temporary egg tooth that will fall away within hours, it emerges into a world where everything larger than it is a potential predator: snakes, larger lizards, spiders as big as its own head, birds scanning the ground from above. The hatchling has no stored fat, no learned instincts, no parent to follow. It must find food within the first day, or risk its already fragile energy reserves collapsing entirely. It is, from its very first breath, already behind, already losing, and the clock is already running. This creature learns alone. This is not poetic. It is a brutal logistical reality. A gecko hatchling receives no guidance, no demonstration, no warning call from a parent. It must, through trial and error, through actual failure, learn what is safe to eat, what surface will hold its weight, where a predator hides, and how to flee. Every lesson is learned at a cost. Every mistake is potentially the last. The gecko's famous adhesive feet, those remarkable toe pads lined with millions of microscopic hair-like structures called setae, do not work perfectly from birth. Young geckos must learn which surfaces allow grip and which betray them. A smooth, wet surface, a loose piece of bark, an angle slightly too steep, and the gecko falls. In the open, a fall is not merely embarrassing. It is an exposure. It announces position. It invites attention. Predators notice movement. They notice sound. They notice the small, panicked scramble of a creature that has just made an error. And the warnings about predators, they come not from experience shared, but from experience suffered. A gecko that survives an ambush by a centipede, a close strike from a snake, or the dive of a shrike learns. But it learns only because it was fast enough, lucky enough, or small enough to be not worth chasing that one time. Next time, the math may not work in its favor. There is no second parent to warn it. There is only the memory of nearly dying, and the body's desperate attempt to do better. Watch a gecko for long enough, and you begin to understand that nothing, not a single moment of its existence, is without cost. The gecko is ectothermic. It cannot generate its own body heat. This means its entire metabolism, digestion, reflexes, the speed of its tongue strike, the quickness of its escape is entirely dependent on the ambient temperature of its environment. In the heat of the day in its native desert or tropical habitat, the gecko retreats, not to rest, to survive. Direct sunlight in a desert can raise a small gecko's body temperature beyond the point of cellular function within minutes. It hides in crevices, under rocks, inside hollow wood, not because it is resting, because it is waiting for the world to become survivable again. When night falls, the nocturnal gecko emerges, and now it must find food in darkness, navigating terrain by touch and scent, and the remarkable sensitivity of those enormous eyes, evolved to gather the faintest scraps of moonlight. It hunts insects, spiders, small invertebrates. But prey is not abundant. A gecko may patrol for hours and find almost nothing. Its energy reserve, already minimal, depletes with every step. If it finds nothing, it will be weaker tomorrow. A weaker gecko is a slower gecko. A slower gecko is a caught gecko. For one moment, watching it dart across a moonlit stone, precise, purposeful, almost beautiful it seems, as though this small animal has mastered something. Then a barn owl's shadow passes overhead, and the gecko flattens itself against the rock so completely it almost disappears, its heart hammering in a body the size of a human thumb, and the illusion shatters. It has not mastered anything, it is simply still alive, and that is the entirety of its victory. The gecko's greatest trick is not its sticky feet, or its regenerating tail, or its ability to change color. Its greatest trick is this: it can shed its own tail. When seized by a predator, when a snake clamps onto its lower body, or a cat bats it to the floor, the gecko's tail detaches. It writhes on the ground independently, thrashing in a grotesque distraction while the gecko escapes. It is extraordinary. It is also agonizing. The tail contains stored fat reserves, the gecko's only buffer against starvation. Losing it is not merely losing a limb, it is losing a life raft. The gecko will spend weeks or months regrowing that tail, during which time it is nutritionally depleted, structurally compromised, and critically, it cannot shed again. If another predator catches it in this window, there is no second escape. And predators are everywhere. Cats, both domestic and feral, are one of the gecko's most devastating modern threats. A single feral cat can eliminate dozens of geckos from a local population. Snakes track geckos by scent into their own hiding places. Parasites, mites, intestinal worms weaken them from inside, invisible and relentless. In drought years, the insects they depend on disappear, and the geckos follow soon after, found desiccated in the crevices they crawled into, looking for shade that couldn't save them. It does not know that the greatest threat of all moves slowly, invisibly, and at a scale the gecko cannot perceive. It does not know about habitat loss. It does not know about pesticides eliminating its food supply. It does not know. It only knows the next step, the next shadow, the next night. And sometimes that is not enough. Here is the cruel irony at the center of the gecko's existence. This animal, small, fragile, expendable by every measure, is essential. In the ecosystems it inhabits, geckos are one of the most significant controllers of insect populations. Mosquitoes, moths, beetles, cockroaches, ants, the gecko consumes them in staggering numbers across a single lifetime. In tropical island ecosystems particularly, geckos serve as primary pollinators for plants that rely on nighttime visitors. They disperse seeds. They hold fragile food webs in place with their small, sticky feet. Remove the gecko, and the cascade is immediate. Insect populations surge. Plant pollination collapses. Other predators who depend on geckos as prey, the snakes, the larger lizards, the birds, lose a foundational food source. Ecosystems that took thousands of years to stabilize begin to unravel within a generation. The gecko holds the world together, and the world does not hold the gecko. It is hunted. It is poisoned inadvertently through pesticide accumulation in its prey. Its habitat is bulldozed for resorts and roads. It is collected for the exotic pet trade, snatched from the wild to sit in glass tanks in living rooms, far from everything it has ever known. And through all of this, it continues, not triumphantly, not heroically. It continues the way the desperate always do, because stopping is not an option, and because no one is coming to help. There are over 1,700 known species of gecko, and that number, for all its apparent abundance, conceals a far darker truth. Dozens of gecko species are classified as threatened or endangered. The day gecko of Mauritius, the dwarf gecko of the Canary Islands, the bovia species of New Caledonia. Island endemic gecko species found nowhere else on Earth are disappearing quietly, one small population at a time. On islands where invasive predators and habitat destruction have rewritten the rules of survival faster than evolution can respond. Should humans intervene? The question carries weight on both sides. Captive breeding programs have saved some populations from total extinction. Invasive predator control removing feral cats and rats from islands has allowed some gecko populations to begin recovering. These are real, measurable wins. They exist, but they are expensive, logistically complex, and dependent on sustained political will that conservation rarely enjoys for long. The moment funding dries up, the cats return, the rats return, and the geckos already at the margin slip back toward the edge. Some would argue this is nature, that species come and go, that extinction is the ultimate biological truth. Perhaps. But there is a difference between a species lost to the slow grind of geological time and a species lost in a single human generation because of a pesticide, a feral animal, and a bulldozer. One is natural. The other is something else, and calling it natural does not make it less of a loss. The gecko's range is, by any measure, remarkable. They inhabit every continent except Antarctica. They live in the Sahara and in rainforests, on high-altitude rock faces and in coastal mangroves, on remote Pacific islands, and in the ceiling tiles of Bangkok apartment buildings. They have followed humanity into its cities, adapting to the artificial warmth of electric lights that attract the insects the gecko needs to survive, a relationship that appears symbiotic but is fragile, transactional, and easily broken. But range is not safety. The countries with the highest gecko diversity, Madagascar, Australia, the islands of Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, are also the countries with the highest rates of habitat loss. Madagascar has lost more than 90% of its original forest. Southeast Asian lowland forests are among the most rapidly disappearing ecosystems on Earth. The gecko's home is not a sanctuary. It never was. It is a shrinking patchwork of viable habitat, fragmented by roads and agriculture and urban sprawl, with fewer corridors between fragments every year. A gecko population cut off from others cannot replenish itself after a local disaster. A disease, a drought, a single introduced predator, and an isolated population does not recover. It simply ends. The gecko clings to its diminishing home the same way it clings to glass, with everything it has, using every microscopic structure it possesses, and still, sometimes, it falls. Somewhere, right now, a gecko is pressed flat against a wall in the dark. It has been hunting for 3 hours and found almost nothing. Its regenerating tail is only half grown. Its territory has shrunk. Some new disturbance, some new smell, some new threat has pushed it out of the crevice it used to sleep in. It is cold. It is slow. It is calculating in whatever wordless, ancient way geckos calculate whether to move or to stay still. Every option carries risk. Every direction leads to something that could end it. It does not know that it is extraordinary. It does not know that its feet perform feats of physics that human engineers have spent decades trying to replicate. It does not know that it pollinates flowers, controls pests, anchors food webs. It does not know that there are people who travel to remote islands to count its kind and come back with numbers that keep them awake at night. It only knows the wall, the dark, the waiting. It will press itself into the night until the night becomes survivable, and then it will do it again and again. For however many nights it has left, which may be fewer than it deserves, and almost certainly more than the world has made space for, we press our faces to the glass and say, "Look how cute! Look how strange! Look how it clings!" We do not say, "Look how tired! Look how long it has been doing this! Look at what we are taking from it!" One quiet decision at a time. The gecko does not ask to be saved. It does not know to ask. It only clings. And one day, perhaps not this generation, perhaps not the next, it will cling to something, and the surface will not hold.